Many thanks for joining us. I will introduce you all in a second. After touching more on the global policy level in the opening, we would like to set now the scene with the aid sector on the humanitarian system crisis and the so-called humanitarian reset. Just very quickly, we'd like to share, because not all of you might have all the latest info, what it's been about. Talking about funding, we can share a quick slide, and colleagues here on the panel can take a look here on the screen. Where do we stand after the end of US aid? Maybe just to making sure we have a sort of a little same playing field. We have on the funding cut a slide prepared on the scenario, how might humanitarian funding change in 2025. I hope we can share it in a second. We've seen, as analyzed by colleagues, the biggest drop of humanitarian funding ever already in 2025, with 5 billion euro going down. Here's the slide on the screen. We've noticed that 16 out of the 20 top donors have decreased funding already last year. We're talking about last year only. And we have the scenario what the drop of funding by US aid might mean in 2025, with a couple of scenarios going down probably to levels last time seen maybe 2016, 2015. The action points on the meeting agreed, the much awaited one last week in Geneva, happy to share quickly as well. And maybe if possible, can we share it here on the screen as well? Because now we see Tamam, which I will welcome in a second as well. Otherwise, happy to read it. Ramesh has touched already on the outcomes of the ISC meeting, which have been a hyper-prioritized global humanitarian overview. We've heard the numbers. Initially, there was the analysis. We have 300 million people in need at least in 2025. Targeted from the beginning only about 177 million, and now going down to say, well, let's aim at least at 114, as you can see on the screen. A transition out of 8 countries, much debated already, some of the countries being on a couple of indices pretty high. Reducing clusters, coordination mechanism from 15 to 8. On the accountability side, UN and NGO leaders being accountable, if we can move to the second slide, being accountable in future to a humanitarian coordinator. If that's taken really in a straightforward manner, I can reassure from my past that would be really a major game changer, but it's an open question what it might mean in actual terms. And significantly greater funding too, we discussed that in the opening, country-built funds with Tom Fletcher, proposing, while no agreement yet on that one, 50% going to pooled funds in future and 70 out of that to local actors. So we touched on the financial outlook on that one. We have one more to broaden the picture, because also Stefan Klingebiel is gratefully with us, kindly with us, on what does the funding curve mean on the ODA side and the aid side. I'm not sure if we have the graph ready on that one as well on the financial outlook, where the scenarios are going pretty much down as well, as you can see in this graph if we look at the forecast for the years to come. Given that it's a much broader context we discuss, I'm really grateful that we have a really very broad panel with us. We have Stefan Klingebiel from IDOS, we have Margaret Müller from Oxfam International, Norbert Altenkamp from the Federal Parliament, which unfortunately will need to leave us for another vote in the Parliament in about half an hour. So we. Okay, yeah. We turn to you as soon as possible after a little scene setting, and we have Tamam Aloudat, who's the CEO, the chief of the New Humanitarian, which most of you will know as the key medium outlet on all humanitarian issues globally, one might say. But quickly starting with Stefan Klingebiel, because we want to set the scene a bit broader, as it's not all about humanitarian issues. A key point we touched on, Stefan, in the dialogue we had before was if it's a much broader issue and if it might be less about finance and more about norms. You are the Director General of Development Issues of IDOS. Some of you might know it better as a Deutsches Institut für Entwicklungspolitik, DIH, in the past, and you've dealt with that pretty much. You mentioned in our prep talk, it might be not really about finances. It might be much more risky what happens to our norms. What did you mean by that?
Yeah, good morning, and thank you for the invitation. Great to exchange with you. Yeah, maybe let me share with you 2 or 3 points to kick off, including this norm dimension, which I really find important. One is a quick reminder, why do we have this kind of crisis situation, that support for development cooperation, for ODA, for humanitarian aid is decreasing. Just quickly, 5 or 6 points I find most important. One is we have those domestic fiscal pressure situations in almost all OECD countries. I mean, if you look at the UK, 1 or 2 days before Starmer met for the first time Trump as president, he was announcing he is going to cut aid because of defense budget. Here it's a bit more indirect in Germany, but it's more or less everywhere the same, France, etc., etc. And it's about defense, but also a bit this kind of rundown infrastructure situation we have in many traditional OECD countries. Yeah. A second point is this kind of geopolitical context development cooperation is operating in. I just want to highlight the very beginning of development cooperation was a geopolitical context. If you remember the Truman speech from 1947, that was about the geopolitical context. We, the West, we need to offer something. Kennedy in 1961 created OECD and the Development Assistance Committee. West Germany was pushed very much by Kennedy. You have this trade surplus, you need to invest, and we need to find friends everywhere. So it's not totally new, but there was this kind of, let's say, window of opportunity in 1990s, 2000s, where, you know, aid effectiveness, let's just focus on how to do it better. And now we have this return. I think the very beginning was China's Belt and Road Initiative to a large extent. Look, you go to almost every country on the African continent and elsewhere, you arrive at the new terminal constructed by China, the road to the center of the city constructed China. You know all this, and everybody had this kind of impression, how does it come that we Western donors invest already for many decades, but what is visible and also turns out as a political access point to countries is what China is doing. So, and if you look at Ursula von der Leyen's speech from December 21, where she announced the Global Gateway Initiative, this is to compete with China, to put it in a very simplistic way. And this is not the only example, but we have even more. I think rise of populism is something in addition. Yeah, populism is not totally new. We also know it from the south. Yeah, if you look at a couple of African countries, some observers would put India in this category. But we also have it here in Europe. We have one big country in North America. I think it fits there. And populism, and this is my fourth point, is typically very much focusing on national interest in a very narrow sense, and you are more or less against multilateral approaches. And this is what we right now see. The still ongoing review of the membership of the United States in international organizations will come to an end at the beginning of August. I don't think it's a very serious review, but the intention is we want to pull out, even beyond WHO, etc., etc. 2 more points, and this is something what I typically try to emphasize is developing countries are today, on average, this doesn't mean all countries, but on average, in a much better situation than 10, 20, 30 years ago. You can take almost every indicator, GDP, Human Development Index, etc. What I typically like to mention as an illustration is, you know, this term graduation, that countries graduate from the list of recipient countries, yeah, who are eligible. And since 1983, 48 countries were taken from this list. And we will have another roughly 20 countries for the next 10 years, including China, including Turkey, and some others. It's an indication many countries are much better off today. And I think this is also a bit, let's say, this kind of implicit understanding of decision makers, the public, that, look, India, they sent rockets to the orbit. How does it come that we are still considering India a developing country? And last but not least, related to it, decreasing dependency on aid or ODA. Countries have, even low-income countries, more options in terms of South-South cooperation, in terms of investments, look at minerals, etc., etc. So it's a combination of different factors. My second point I want to make, and probably I'm overstretching my time budget, but just one quick point, maybe also for the discussion. I think we development, humanitarian, and other communities focus very much on the funding dimensions, the financial crisis, and we have a financial crisis in many regards. What we underestimate, and that was your starting point, is the change of concepts and assumptions. If you look at what is going on in New York at the level of the United Nations, you have a situation where the United States is saying Agenda 2030 and its SDGs, it's against our national interest. In the past, we don't care. But now it's against national interest. We have all board meetings in New York where this kind of conflict is happening, that climate change, diversity, gender, if your country program includes those terms, it makes a big conflict. And the situation we have is that many actors try to avoid those terms. It's impacting our concepts. It's impacting our mindset. Yeah? And you probably know this questionnaire, 36 questions coming from the US administration going to international organizations and NGOs asking those things. Do you have a focus on gender? And if you use this tick box, you might have a problem. So what I want to say is, this is probably, with a mid- and long-term perspective, the even more important dimension beside financial aspects, because this is that's a future investment. Are decision makers, is the public interested, convinced about our concepts? And this is changing very much. So I'm really want to highlight this. Yeah, sorry.
Very important point, but following up maybe on this one, because we keep talking for good reasons about Trump and the US, but many say, well, for a couple of years we see this trend of contested aid, and we've analyzed it last year, why we want to focus on it in Europe as well. And we see an issue, for example, in Germany on this one as well. Against this backdrop, how would you judge, and then we move to Norbert Altenkamp before he can escape, how do you judge in this regard on the setup of the new German government, on the coalition agreement, of phrases which in one way on the humanitarian side are very value-driven in the, for example, coalition agreement, but very politicized, very national interest oriented in the development part? How do you judge on the setup of the new German government?
I think it's not really easy. Maybe a couple of points. One is, in the coalition agreement, we do not have something like a philosophy how the new government is looking at humanitarian topics and development cooperation. We have some topics, ODA ratio needs to go down, something like this, but this is not a concept. So we need to work on this. This is one aspect. A second one is, we want to bring down our engagement in terms of financial contributions, and this is what I would call in Germany, or in German, Verzwergung, diminishing what Germany could do. Third one is, it's a bit, let's say, it's a compromise. We still have a BMZ, we have humanitarian aid, but everything is going to shrink. And this is a time where Germany could speak up with an anti-Trump model, with a pro-multilateralist approach. And this is not really something what is loud enough, I would say. Yeah? In this regard, we have the potential, Germany, the government, this new Brandt Commission, etc., to make use of it, also to make it a big, or rather big international splash. But government and parliament needs to be pushed also to some extent to play this role.
Many thanks for now. Now turning to Norbert Alpenkamp. Many thanks for being with us. Norbert Alpenkamp is Member of Parliament with the Conservative Party, one of the most experienced parliamentarians on the humanitarian side, being in the Committee for Humanitarian Affairs and Human Rights for many, many years, and now nominated also as the Speaker of the Conservative Party on humanitarian issues. And just as a heads up, we agreed that the questions will be in English, but Norbert Alpenkamp will prefer to answer in German, and I try to do my best in translating. And we agreed on very short answers for this, so you might benefit from that one. Norbert Alpenkamp, would you agree with the analysis of Stefan Klingelbiel that we are in an era of contested aid and that it's a bit confusing mix, what we have heard so far from the new German approach?
Also erstmal herzlichen Dank und man kann sich manchmal in seiner eigenen Heimatsprache besser ausdrücken und von daher bitte ich da um Verständnis, dass ich das so mache. Aber Sie haben bei mir ein großes Tor eingerannt und zwar dahingehend, dass wir die Chance haben, den Anti-Trump zu machen. Und insofern glaube ich eben auch, dass gerade die humanitäre Hilfe auch als fundamentales Sicherheitsinteresse Deutschlands verstanden ist und nicht einfach nur als Herz-Jesu-Politik, sondern eben in unserem Interesse sein muss, um eben einen Kontrapunkt zu setzen.
So you thanked very much for being here. That's nice of you. And you said you could only echo what Stefan said, that we have a chance to set ourselves up as an anti-Trump angle and actor, and by doing so also to focus on the fundamental linkage between humanitarian aid and development aid and security issues. What would be needed for that from your view? I mean, taking it for now in a very pragmatic way, what would it mean for the new German government to set itself up as the anti-Trump actor, maybe with a couple of Europeans? What would it mean in policy terms and funding-wise?
Also zunächst einmal möchte ich feststellen, dass wir mit dem Haushaltsplan 2025 eigentlich nur eine buchhalterische Größenordnung, um überhaupt eine Basis zu haben für einen Haushalt 2026, jetzt einziehen. Das hat leider Gottes erstmal die negative Folge, dass das, was erstmal im September letzten Jahres festgeschrieben wurde, nämlich eine Reduktion der humanitären Hilfe, jetzt mit dem Haushalt 2025, der dann im September 2025 beschlossen wird, da ist kein Turnaround mehr zu machen. Also unsere Aufgabe muss es schon sein, das, was im Koalitionsvertrag festgeschrieben ist. Ich meine, man will die humanitäre Hilfe verstetigen, aber verstetigen kann nicht bedeuten, auf dem niedrigen Niveau, was 2025 festgeschrieben wurde. Und es ist immer alle Ehre wert, dass man sagt, naja, wir haben verstanden, wir müssen mit weniger Geld auskommen, aber das ist sehr bescheiden ausgedrückt, aber ohne Moos nichts los. Also man muss da schon substanziell nachsteuern.
The Germans in the room are applauding already. I tried to translate now, ohne Moos nichts los. If it's a fair summary, the budget is only coming from a very low baseline. We need to make a turnaround, but we couldn't manage to do so in 2025. We wanted to stabilize humanitarian funding, and you didn't comment, I think, on the development side, but we can touch on that one later on. But you made a very clear point. Budget is not everything, but without budget, everything is nothing, if I may rephrase it like that. You mentioned we wanted to stabilize, maybe we can show the next slide. We wanted to stabilize based on the coalition agreement what's in the budget so far. Actually, I wanted to go to our little dictionary exercise, because in the coalition agreement it said the humanitarian budget shall be auskömmlich in future. This is a very old-fashioned German word, and I tried to figure out what it might mean. And the younger ones of you will never heard of the Duden as a book, probably let alone Duden.de, not even Duden.id. I'm not sure if you can read it on this screen. Auskömmlich, roughly in English, maybe, was it sufficient, something like that. But in German, you would say ausreichend, again, sufficient. And quite interestingly, because that's the original Duden definition from the famous German language dictionary, it's a very humanitarian definition, no? It's ausreichend für den Lebensunterhalt. It's sufficient for making a living. Or even as an example shared for appropriate conditions of life. One of the key issues we keep discussing, and maybe also for your advocacy when you try to raise the budget in the next weeks, months and years, hopefully, is either what might mean auskömmlich, and maybe we keep it aside, otherwise, unless you can share with us a definition from your view. What's the criteria? And there is an astonishing lack, one must admit, both in analysis, in research, but also in the policy debate. What is an adequate humanitarian budget for a given donor and for Germany? Would you have any comment on that one?
Also auf jeden Fall ist die jetzt aufgerufene 1 Milliarde im Vergleich dazu, dass wir von ursprünglich, da haben wir noch mal regiert, von 3,3 Milliarden abgeschmolzen ist. Und ich sag mal, auskömmlich ist humanitäre Hilfe nie. Das kann sie nach der Definition auch nicht sein, weil natürlich auch die Möglichkeiten mit Geld natürlich auch immer entsprechend steigen. Aber die basishumanitäre Hilfe, dass also den Menschen die schwerste Not, also der schwerste Hunger beispielsweise, die nicht vorhandene Gesundheitsversorgung, dass man dort die elementaren Bedürfnisse decken muss, das ist unstreitig. Wir werden da nicht die Lücke der Amerikaner füllen können. Aber wenn wir dort Führung übernehmen, glaube ich, würde uns das sehr zu Gesicht stehen, und damit hänge ich mich jetzt mal aus dem Fenster raus. Also das, was an Kürzungen von 24 auf 25 passiert ist, das muss mindestens revidiert werden.
Anything? Oh, sorry. Again, the German applause, and sorry, I have to stick to my other role. So you shared that 1 billion is definitely too little. We come from funding, and maybe we can share the next slide to illustrate for the ones who haven't been on that one for the past years, how German humanitarian assistance has evolved over the past years. And Norbert Altenkam shared that there's never an auskömmlich budget. So maybe then we should cut it out of the coalition agreement. But basic needs shall need to be met, and elementary needs, and you shared that for this, at least going back to the 24 budget, if I got that right, would be like about 2.2 billion, as you can see on the screen. In your advocacy with your colleagues, with the new foreign minister from the Conservative Party, etc., again, trying to link it a bit to what kind of criteria do we all need to evolve, and what narratives might we have on hand by arguing for a given budget. And if we can have a look at another slide, we tried to look into this very briefly as a kick-off of a future work plan priority. We did, for one, a bit of fair share analysis, very preliminary, which tries to analyze what is the overall global need, and what is, if you look at the OECD DAC donor countries and their economic power, what would be a proportional fair share, what they should contribute to meet these needs, to turn the conversation a bit around, and rather asking what are the needs, and if they are agreed on, what is the fair share of a given donor to deal with them. And quite interesting from our view, because especially in Germany, but also with the other top donors, I believe, we have this narrative that they are overstretched, they are paying the bill for the world. even if you look in the past, like you see here on the Germany 2023 slide, you could argue, well, Germany was close to a fair share maybe, but surely not paying the bill for everybody else. Even Qatar and some Arabic ones have been ahead. Surely not the Americans anymore. And we try to link it. We can't deep dive on this one also to a couple of other indicators, like what would be the actual contribution, nor what Altenkam needs now to lobby on to raise it. If you relate it to a couple of other indicators, which might want to reference, but there's no agreement on these one, and we will keep working on it with our homework for this. And for example, the EU target to contribute a tenth of this agreed 0.7 of GDP to humanitarian aid would mean in the German context to raise the budget to 2.8 roughly. Similar, the fair share model I just shared in absolute terms, or just raising it in a given ODA budget, which Germany has, if you summarize it with development, with what is also shared on, contributed on refugee hosting, etc. If you raise it to a 50% average of overall ODA Germany is providing, you would even reach a much higher sum. Now, what Altenkam, there has been a lot of figures in a go. Do you think any of these indicators or any analysis which might provide some evidence what could be a fair sum could help in this debate? Because you might also be questioned, so why is 2 billion right and 1 billion wrong? Why not 5 billion? Why not half?
Naja, also ich sag mal, man muss ja immer eine Argumentationsbasis haben. Und jetzt habe ich den großen Vorteil, dass bisher bei uns in der Fraktion war der Bereich Menschenrechte, humanitäre Hilfe immer so ein bisschen versteckt bei der Europapolitik. Da sind wir jetzt organisatorisch rausgezogen worden und sind zu den Verteidigungspolitikern und zu den Außenpolitikern gesteckt worden. Ganz wichtig ist mir, dass wir quasi organisatorisch bei den Verteidigungspolitikern mit angedockt sind, weil dort ist gerade Goldgräberstimmung und dort kann man wirklich auch natürlich auch an das schlechte Gewissen appellieren und sagen, pass mal auf, da ist jetzt, also wir haben einen kleinen Aufwuchs gegenüber dem Ampelhaushalt schon, und zwar von 8 Millionen. Das ist natürlich dann mein Argument in der Arbeitsgruppe gewesen. Ein Leopard 2 Panzer kostet so je nach Ausstattung 6 Millionen bis 25 Millionen. Also es kann doch nicht sein, dass praktisch ein Aufwuchs nur im Wert eines Panzers passiert ist und wir anschließend viel rostenden Stahl in der Garage stehen haben, aber ansonsten nichts für die Sicherheit und die humanitäre Hilfe erreicht haben in der Welt. Das ist sozusagen auch der Argumentationsansatz, mit dem ich da unterwegs bin. Humanitäre Hilfe ist keine Herz-Jesu-Geschichte, sondern ist ein elementarer Wert der menschlichen Gemeinschaft, der Weltgemeinschaft, um eben in Solidarität auch gemeinschaftlich Menschheit weiterzuentwickeln. Und deswegen ist das manchmal, hört sich das so schräg an, dass wir jetzt bei den Verteidigungspolitikern mit am Tisch sitzen, aber ich sehe das als sehr, 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 sehr große Chance.
Just translating quickly, you may need to make an argument in a different way, in a new argumentation. You are very happy that you are now also internally located together with the defense and foreign policy colleagues, different than in the past. With these defense colleagues, there's a Goldgräberstimmung. Any volunteers to translate that? There's a mute that now is boom times and a lot of funding will come up on the defense side, fair. While Norbert Altenkam made the comparison, well, we increased the humanitarian budget for 8 million, which is less than one single Leopard tank. Leopard 2, sorry. Leopard 2 tank is the cost for that one. And you made a point, and happy to touch on this one. We shouldn't talk that much about charity, Herz Jesu charity, and just elementing other people, but about interest and security. Do you see also a risk to link humanitarian values, humanitarian principles in a very interest-driven debate? At some point, it might be a very easy argument to say, well, for now, we don't see that it's our top priority interest, and if it's not, why should we fund it in any substantial way? Versus the argument, well, let's stick to having a responsibility, a rights-based approach, an approach which argues, well, we have to share something, even if it's not in our interest, and even in contexts which are not in our national interest.
Ich glaube, humanitäre Hilfe war immer schon interessengeleitet, weil Bilder von Leid von Menschen lässt einen Menschen ja nicht kalt. Insofern ist es ja auch selber im eigenen Interesse, das Leid von Menschen zu lindern, weil man das schlicht und ergreifend als normaler Mensch doch gar nicht ertragen kann. Insofern ist es immer interessengeleitet, Menschen zu helfen. Dass man das natürlich immer verstärkt da tut, wo man gerade einen Fokus drauf hat. Wir hatten das jetzt letztes Halbjahr oder im letzten Jahr hatten wir das Thema vergessene Krisen. Und das ist schon bemerkenswert, auf wie viele Augen wir blind sein können. Aber es ist leider Gottes auch in einer medialen Welt so, mit digitalen Medien, dass man in der Lage häufig den Fokus der Hilfe immer dahin lenkt, wo es sozusagen für einen am auffälligsten ist. Und das wird sich auch wahrscheinlich nie ändern.
So you shared that aid has always been interest-driven as well, but while we have this issue of forgotten crisis and many forgotten crises, and media are not paying much attention to these crises, while I guess the fear of many is that the forgotten crises are forgotten for a reason, because they don't relate to geopolitics and defense issues, etc. So that's a bit the concern, I guess, of many people, that we see even more forgotten crises and funds even going more and more to European-related contexts, etc. And that might be a challenge. Maybe final question before happy to open the debate, maybe to the colleagues. This argument of focusing on security dimensions, because it's a narrative with a momentum right now. A couple of colleagues did so, including former Conservative Party leader Kramp-Karrenbauer lately, former foreign ministers from Germany, etc., lobbying for example, a high development budget after the elections. The success has been pretty limited. What gives you hope that this argument could fly in the near future, for example, in the German context?
Naja, wir haben ja gelernt, dass Gesellschaft, auch Politik sich hauptsächlich durch Narrative speist. Und wir haben ja leider Gottes in den vergangenen Monaten, Jahren eher das Narrativ, gerade von populistischer Seite gesehen, wozu brauchen wir das überhaupt? Also fand auch eine starke Delegitimierung statt. Ich sage mal Stichwort Fahrradwege in Peru. Das ist ja, da wird ja gezielt gesucht nach einem gewissen Verhetzungspotenzial. So nach dem Motto, make America great again, make Germany great again, und wir kümmern uns nur noch um uns selbst. Zu verstehen, dass das in unserem fundamentalen Eigeninteresse ist, dass die Welt nicht aus den Fugen gerät und humanitäre Hilfen auch ein wesentliches Element dafür ist, dass die Welt nicht weiter aus den Fugen gerät. Wenn wir das schaffen, auch in die Köpfe der Kollegen halt zu implementieren, dann, glaube ich, kann man auch einen neuen Weg und auch ein neues Narrativ entsprechend setzen.
Many thanks. Norbert Altenkamp sharing that he has still hopes that there is an opportunity to lobby in an interest-driven way with colleagues who are in charge of the funding side and on hard powers, defense policies, etc. with colleagues. In a minute, because Norbert Altenkamp has to leave very soon, you have the chance very quickly to ask one or two questions from the audience here on site, if you wish, to Norbert Altenkamp, and there will be a mic flying. In the meantime, I'd like to bring up quickly Tamam, who's been waiting very patiently. Tamam Aloudat. Can you hear us, Tamam?
Yes, I can hear you well. Thank you.
Hello, Tamam. Great to have you. Many thanks for dialing in. We know that you are in Prague these days with all your team, and that's why you couldn't make it. Tamam, you are the CEO of the New Humanitarian, and we sorry for hesitating a bit. We still need to bring you also on the broader screen, but happy to kick it off. You can see us, right?
Yes.
Excellent. Tamam, listening to what we debated before, we talk a lot about the humanitarian systems crisis, we talk a lot about funding, about security issues, etc. Is this a fair horizon for the debate, or how would you frame it with your broad context and being one of the few neutral actors in this as the CEO of the New Humanitarian, not having any funding interest or organizational interest in this whole debate? Over to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ralph. Let me start by, sitting and listening. It's interesting that you have chosen to talk about the interest versus charity, about your budgets, about the politics, and so on, and to not mention almost at all people affected by those cuts or by the humanitarian crisis themselves. So let me just frame this a little bit. Just the cuts of the US, and here I'm not talking about the global cuts of most Western governments. The cuts to PEPFAR, the president's program on HIV, is estimated by USAID to have caused the daily death of 600 people, amounting to an estimated 220,000 people dead of preventable, treatable, and was treated HIV only in 2025. The Lancet HIV has estimated a 2029, and that's a conservative estimate, at about 3.7 million, if I remember right. There will be 100,000 additional deaths of malaria because of the cuts to the President's Malaria Initiative, and 13 million new cases. There will be millions of deaths. There is an estimate, a complete estimate of only the US AID cuts of between 500,000 and 1.4 million in 1 year. So, and this is, it's entirely different if we start framing things from national interest and talk about it as if it is another, just one topic of balancing budget. And if we talk about people's lives, and those that will be lost immediately. And these estimates are not only the estimates, those are only the estimates of the US cuts. Those do not factor the estimates of cuts by Europeans. So let me go back and start from the end. The interest and security-based humanitarianism or international aid has always been the case, and it is I mean, it's hard to not see it as a cynical argument. The fact that we are dispensing of any pretense of aid being right or a measure of solidarity or part of the politics of right that Western Europe and North America have assumed or advocated or advertised for decades, and suddenly that is not the case is a little bit disconcerting. And there was a mention of Germany being an anti-Trump model, and I turned off my camera because I couldn't control my facial expressions. I mean, it's just recently that the Chancellor said there's no reason to criticize the US bombing of Iran, an blatantly illegal act of aggression, however you feel about the Iranian regime. Suddenly, the rule of law that has been established since the Second World War stops being important. And I mean, Europe is, we think often that Europe is a few steps ahead of the US in terms of tolerating and accepting and integrating populism and the far-right shift. I don't know that this is an objective observation. President Ursula von der Leyen just a couple of days ago tweeted that she has called in full solidarity with Prime Minister Netanyahu, who is who has a warrant on him by the ICC. This doesn't have, I can't imagine the President of the European Union calling any other alleged war criminal with a call on for their arrest by the ICC. But that's beside the point. There is a humanitarian crisis. Absolutely, the humanitarian crisis is erupted on the scene because of the cuts in aid, because of the starting, the more vulgar appearance of the Trump administration cuts on aid. But as you said, this is not new. This has been happening for a while, and most European countries have cut aid to a large effect over the past years. This didn't start in January 2025. What has happened is the aid system is asked explicitly to prioritize and do less with less, as Tom Fletcher puts it. And the cuts, the hyper-prioritization that was mentioned, reduces 65 million people out of the aid humanitarian review and $15 billion. We're yet to figure who's going to not be in that and who will, be deprived of services and die in the light of hyper-prioritization. I'm sure that, I believe that there will be a prioritization in most vulnerability, but there will be people neglected and ignored and left to perish.
Tamam, just to quickly come in to give you the chance that you get a reaction of Norbert Altenkam, who has to leave in a minute. Do you mind if we stop here and come back to you right after? If that's okay, thank you so much for that. Norbert Altenkam, you heard the perspective, how challenging it might be and disruptive to focus on interest only, and what might be the outcome if you look at from a longer term and not start the discussion by humanitarian needs and values. Would you like to share a very quick reaction before you leave? Can you switch on the mic again? Thank you.
Dann nehmen wir das jetzt. Also wir werden nie aus dem Dilemmata rauskommen, dass man auf der einen Seite sich Dinge wünscht und auf der anderen Seite mit der Realität konfrontiert wird. Und insofern ist auch, das musste ich dann auch wieder natürlich schmunzeln, klar, dass man dann den Ball aufnimmt und sagt, der Anti-Trump und auf der anderen Seite natürlich sofort sagt, aber wenn es euch passt, dann macht ihr mit dem Amerikaner dann auch entsprechend gemeinsame Sache an der Stelle. Ne? Und da müssen wir uns ein bisschen emanzipieren, und ich glaube, da sind wir auch auf dem Weg, uns entsprechend zu emanzipieren.
So Norbert Altenkam shared that you never get out of the dilemmata of your wish list and the reality, and it's a fair point that there might be double standards in positioning yourself as anti-Trump, but at the same time relying in when you prefer on the US approach and US capacities, while there might be a need to emancipate yourself on that one. We hope this is done in a process very value-based. We hope you're very successful in lobbying for the humanitarian cause, and we hope for the best on the normative side, as shared by colleagues, as well on the funding side. And we thank you so much, in spite of a challenging day, to be with us, and many thanks for being here. Norbert Altenkam, please give a hand to Norbert Altenkam before we continue. Tamam, any feedback you would like to share? And of course, we would forward it later on. I mean, how would you argue how do we need to balance idealism and realism, pragmatism and the value-based approach?
I can't pretend. Look, I don't say that, idealism or realism. I think there is a deceptive tension that is created between the two. And I don't think humanitarianism or international aid has always been or ever been idealistic. But I also reject the notion of, yes, we struggle with the dilemmas. There are choices. What is a dilemma to people sitting in an office in suits and having a chat about balancing sheets is a completely different dilemma for people who are deprived of basic medicines and basic services. Those are choices, and just saying that hard choices have to be made and we feel, difficult choices and dilemmas doesn't absolve people. There is an increase in defense budget that is projected in Germany from 63 billion to 162 billion in 2029. And that there has been, if I understand it right, and I might be very well wrong, a cancellation of the debt brake and an acceptance of up to 500 billion in debt for defense. I am in no place to determine whether this is a justifiable or not defense budget. But to say it's the same with the US, they have increased the defense budget to over $1 trillion for the first time and cut down the 60 billion of aid. The UK is doing the same, and it is intentional. At least I follow the UK closely. It is intentional to go on TV and say, we're cutting aid to increase defense. They are not mentioning that they are also cutting services to their own populations. The UK is the 5th or 6th economy in the world. And you know what is the most common shoplifted items? They're diapers for babies. People cannot afford in the 6th economy in the world to buy diapers for their babies. So we can spend more on weapons. So let's not pretend that we're trying all we can, but we're failing because of absolute pressures. There are choices that are made by governments and politicians that cannot be just discounted as yes, it's a dilemma, but we made the choice we made. So where does that put us as a humanitarian system? We are not only suffering of lack of money, and actually there isn't a lack of money. There is plenty of money. It's just being spent on weapons. There's an additional element. It's not only the money, it is also a systemic dismantling of the normative frameworks of humanitarianism. Whether those are legal ones like international humanitarian law that has, and I've quoted Mr. Merz on no reason to criticize the bombing of Iran, to the silence on the absolute dismantling of any legal basis for humanitarianism and the legality of it, whether through double standards, you want to call them, between Iran and Palestine on the one hand and Ukraine on the other, by neglecting what's happening in Somalia, in Sudan, in DRC, in the Rohingya population in both Myanmar and Bangladesh and other places. I can't see this as a crisis of humanitarianism. This is a crisis of liberalism. There has been the post-World War II consensus of liberalism being a good thing, which, by the way, happened while most of our countries were still under colonial rule by the same countries that created the liberal order, but that's beside the point, was that we adhere to a set of principles. In the past years, I cannot see how, and the existence of liberalism in its form has allowed what I would call a humanitarian compromise. That is, as humanitarians, we care about saving lives, so we will use that framework, the condition of necessity, Western liberalism, as a compromise. There is, the continued policy of global domination, the continued exploitation of other countries, the destruction of the environment, the militarization, and so on, whether through the Cold War or after, is none of our business. We're neutral. Just give us the space to save lives. This was fair, a legitimate compromise. Now, that basis of that compromise doesn't matter because we were needed as humanitarians. The exchange was we give the appearance of benevolence to Western liberalism. They're trying their best. Yes, they spend 1,000 times more on weapons than on humanitarianism. That's fine, but they are saving lives.
Tamam, just may I direct you to one aspect on beyond the politics, which are crucial, and I think you can sense why we asked, we hoped to have you as one of the keynote speakers here, but unfortunately you couldn't make it on site, but I think your contributions are already much appreciated here. Can I drive you just to one aspect we discussed before, building up on the very valid point you make on the political context, focusing a bit on the other humanitarian actors. I mean, we see a discussion about the humanitarian reset, which is very international driven, as already touched on in the opening, etc. And you are from Syria. You've been MSF president in the past, not relying on public funding, etc. While at the same time, there is a major discussion if Global South perspectives are yet overlooked in this whole debate. How would you comment on that one?
I mean, yes, there is. And that has been present for a long time and ignored and neglected for a long time. If you look at the humanitarian reset, those of us who have been in this long enough will remember not very different conversations, 2014, 2015, that led to the grand bargain. If you read the earlier papers on the humanitarian reset, you could have been, you could believe that those were written 10 years ago. I believe that there is an attempt on reform. Absolutely. I believe that they probably are trying to learn the lessons of the past. But I also believe that if you do not tackle the politics and assume that there is still a legitimate cause for a donor-driven and donor-satisfying, as it was, not charity, but interest and security, we are going to have a problem. This is not, this is not how, at least we tell ourselves humanitarianism is. And the cost of it is that to keep getting donor money, which is diminishing, that we need to keep pretending that donors, largely Western countries, now to the humanitarian system, are doing everything right. I mean, that was easier to pretend a few years ago. 2 years into Gaza, it's very difficult to pretend that. So we have, I don't know what will happen with the humanitarian reset. I think it might work as far as carrying the system a few years more before, the global reliance on soft power and negotiation and so on becomes obsolete, and all, as the Wall Street Journal puts it, the move from welfare to, warfare states. But until then, as humanitarians, we really need to think about a couple of very basic things. One of them is, what are we providing and what harm are we causing? And this is basic. I mean, in an induction course for someone coming to MSF, we used to talk about do no harm. And the question now is that do no harm is not only in sitting in a camp and doing something that would harm people in that camp. The do no harm is our global positioning as humanitarians and the acceptance of both a global double standard, a dismantling of international law, and a openly, we will only do aid as far as it serves our national interests discourse that is happening in most Western states. Is accepting that narrative neutrally, doing harm to people we are saving that exceeds the benefit we can deliver, is a question that is not given. The answer to that is not a given. And I think we have a duty to examine it well and actually make decisions that rely on those answers that we come up with.
Many thanks, Tamam. I think that was a very straightforward, frank summary of the points you shared before. And let me move quickly, if you allow, to Margaret, who's been so patient here. And I think I better move up to you. It looks a bit funny if I'm sitting all the way over there now. No. Margaret Müller, many thanks for joining us. You are the Deputy Humanitarian Director of Oxfam International. Many thanks for being with us and building maybe a bit on what we touched on the humanitarian actor side when concluding with Tamam. When we had a chat before, you shared, from my view, a very interesting point on elaborating on there has been a reason in the past that we had very different roles on the organizational side between UN agencies, between INGOs, and between local actors. Somehow now everything is done by everybody, and we might need to refocus on mandates and much better appropriate roles for the future. What did you mean by that? Oh, sorry.
Mr. Micro, thank you so much for the question and for having me here at this place, and also to all the men that have already laid out really a wide scope of the issues we have time to discuss and the privilege to discuss today. In Germany, we would say the fat years are over. As a sector, we have grown substantially over the last years, and that has also meant that as institutions and organizations, we have all done more and often overlapped. And as Oxfam, we believe in an ecosystem that needs to remain diverse and that is more strong and resilient when being diverse. But we need to stop everyone trying to do everything, everywhere, all the time, forever. So those are some key aspects that I feel we need to reflect upon. And I want to take a step back, using the privilege of also having a voice at the beginning of these 2 days that we have as reflection, which is quite rare opportunity, as I feel we're all running in emergency and survival mode, is questions I feel we are at the moment where in our institutional vessels, we know we need to change. The whole vessel system, with vessel I mean organizations, the whole vessel system is in question. And we need to we are rethinking with the reset and other questions of how are we functioning as a system. But also, as Tamam just laid out, the waters are changing and are in complete questions, and things that I had never thought would be in question in my lifetime again are in question in what you called crisis of liberty. So, and we risk in all this, we love to be navel-gazing as well in our sector, we risk in all this to, as you just said, Tamam, to risk the focus on our raison d'être. Why are we here? What are we meant to do? So I like to, there's one quote by Rilke that I love very much, where he talks to a student and says, start to love the question, because you can't bear the answer yet. So that's a bad and slow translation, but you may get the idea. It's about giving space for the complexity and not rushing for the quick answers that we may not be able yet to hold. And one question that comes to mind, as we are all representatives of very old, powerful institutions, is, are we also the right people for the answer? And that's a challenge I have with the reset debate, is that those that are most voiceful in it are us that are already holding the power, and are the masters the ones that are going to change the master house? I'm bad with quotations, as you recognize, but I hope you get the idea. So questions we're asking internally, and I'll set the scene more with questions so we have time in the next days, but I will also have answers later. But questions we have internally, and I think we also need to have as a sector, is what are we able and willing and have to let go of? What power do we need to let go of? What doesn't serve us anymore in the future? But also, what is our essence? What do we need to get hold on? What do we need to stand by, stand firm by, and also talk about much more and speak up about? And some of you have talked about it, and I have a point to add to it. But also, as the waters are so unclear and we really don't know what will happen next, in true humanitarian manner, we need to remain adaptive. So that's the way we always work. Actually, we are in a true humanitarian crisis. Everything is chaotic, partially dysfunctional. We need to long-term goals and to drive by sight. And we need the ability to sit with questions, sit with complexity, and not give quick and easy answers, and especially question ourselves if we are the ones to bear the answers. So as a sector, I feel questions we need to ask, especially also with focus on the reset debate we're having, is, are we improving or transforming? And that might go in phases. At the moment, as we're all in survival mode, we might first improve, but then we need to give space for transformation. And as we've already mentioned, none of these questions are new. I've said in Humanitarian Congresses here 10 years ago, where we worked Quo Vadis 2020. Are we focusing on the right things, and are the right people on the table? Who's listening and who's answering? And are we falling into the trap of, not trap, but do we give space to the complexity, or are we giving singular, simple answers to very complex questions? Do we have breath for a multitude of answers that might be needed to be faced? I'll start with this. Are my 5 minutes? I wanted to. One thing about the narrative.
Everybody extended, so of course you are allowed to extend as well.
Thank you. One thing about the narratives, I'm very happy that we're discussing things, because I feel it's been a gap in the last weeks and months that we're so busy with our transformations and our crises, is how are we speaking out about what it is we're doing, why we're there, and what is legitimate and urgent and important about it, and how are we propositional and standing together in this? How are we not against each other? And I would not like it to be an anti-Trump. I want it to be a pro-our values. It doesn't help to be anti-populist. It doesn't help. I never think that the anti is helpful, because it's a response to, but we need to stand for. And we have our principles, we have our values, but we need to get much better in explaining it. And as you said, explain the impact. It's really difficult to explain and showcase the impact of humanitarian. And we need to get better at it and really want us to work on that together. Thank you. Thanks for the extra minute.
Maybe one quick follow-up question. You mentioned, for good reasons and for obvious reasons, that we are discussing these issues and special questions like who's on the table. Why do we define these issues in this discussion right now? At the same time, I might say, well, Oxfam is one of the leading INGOs for decades. Oxfam could have been a leader in changing the system and giving power away. What would you say? What has Oxfam achieved in this regard? And what might be the homework an INGO like Oxfam would still need to do?
So we understand ourselves as an organization that lives by decolonial and feminist values. And this is not an easy thing to live by. And it goes with constant questioning and making errors and relearning, and I find that quite challenging, because also in Humanitarian we like to live by clear hierarchies and quick decision making, so we need to strike a balance there. What it meant for us in recent years has been letting go and constantly questioning power structures, letting go of where we think the headquarters are, and that is ongoing challenges, but also letting go of presence. Do we need to be in every country, and does every country need to be a country office? So we've already left 18, and many of our country offices are becoming affiliates with a very different power dynamic. Do we need to be the self-implementers? Often no. Often it's much better to support partner networks in a way and work in complementarity, and that's a process and an ongoing learning for us. But we believe that us being a service deliverer is a last resort or something that needs to happen when there's no other option. But then how do we partner in a good way? How are we becoming a good partner? That's also a mindset shift. And as a sector, we're still learning that. So it has many, many different facets. Feminist principles for us is much about thinking power very differently, reflecting of our own power and the power that I have been giving this voice, but also the power we have when being in restructure and in change processes. How do we ensure that we're not first letting go of diversity? How do we ensure that it's an inclusive process? How do we ensure that everyone is being heard and has a possibility to let feedback? But really, how do we let go of power? That's a process.
Many thanks, very helpful. We will open the floor for questions from on-site and online in a second. But as we are running over time, a very quick follow-up question to all three of you. And you can prep your questions in between. And asking really for, ideally, really a 1-minute answer, if that's possible. Stefan Klingebiel, we touched on all the challenges and issues. What are the actors you see as who have the power to ensure change, and what role do you see in this in Europe, especially?
Yeah, I think one main challenge is really how to create this kind of momentum and power to make change happen. One aspect I discussed with a couple of colleagues also from countries of the global south is a bit what we call like-minded internationalism, where we think this kind of multilateral approach doesn't work at the moment. We see that at the place of the United Nations. We have those vetoes, not just in the Security Council, but at many places. So we need to find a way how to work around. So to bring together those actors who are willing to think about different models from government, but also beyond government. That's something in my research currently, what I'm doing to a large extent to look for those specific examples where those coalitions are really working and functioning, yeah, like High Ambition Coalition, which is an umbrella for several. Think about the Bridgetown Initiative on global finance, etc. So there are some good examples out there. I think from a European perspective, yes, Europe, we have a couple of countries where I think we have like-minded thinking, but what is even more important is probably to align more with countries, partners from the Global South. We know that many of our assumptions, like what was mentioned already, rule-based order. I mean, just last week I had a think tank meeting in Rabat, Morocco. This kind of rule-based order was an order perceived as a totally unfair order. And for us in Europe, in Germany, it's typically a very positive one. Oh, let's get back to rules-based, and to include this kind of thinking that views might be very different is so crucial.
Okay.
Yeah?
So building new alliances, especially with the Global South, if that's a fair summary. Tamam, you touched very bluntly on power imbalances, and of course changing global power imbalances is a big word. What could be concrete steps and asks, and who could drive them from your view? And again, 1, max 2 minutes would be perfect.
I mean, with all respect to the idea of finding like-minded people, but what mind are we looking for likes of? I don't know that a decentralization or localization that goes from international bourgeoisie to local bourgeoisie is not a continuation of the exact same process that happens through decolonization. And the idea is we still assume an indivisible legitimacy in governments. The rules-based order, which, yes, I agree with you, it wasn't never a rules-based order. This is an order that has been exploitative and extractive. It was very positive for the West because, you know, between colonialism and the post-war system, the West has gotten very, very rich. But the rules-based order is about governments accepting rules of power. This is dropped now. I don't know that governments that did that over the past decades are the ones to be trusted with rebuilding it. There needs to be coalitions of people. And the risk in now is that we have reached a stage in the political debate where unless we have to, you know, wear suits and have a very polite discussion, it's considered unacceptable. And I think, to quote Audre Lorde, there are uses of anger. And if there's no use of anger today, that provokes a conversation that opposes those, you know, it's not radical or a real departure if we take out from the, you know, General Assembly in New York into a similar like-minded government representatives. There is a need for a popular discussion among peoples rather than governments. And it needs to be, I mean, if we're not angry about an ongoing genocide, wars that are continuing, and a massive increase in both extraction and destruction of the planet and armament that aren't going to be causing security, but more death and destruction, then I don't know what are we going to be angry about at any stage, anywhere, anytime. Thanks.
Many thanks, Tamam. Margaret, what would be your key ask if we look into the political dimensions just touched on? What would be your key ask, for example, from Germany as a new government actor in the whole reset debate and how to drive this change? What kind of support would you need for the objectives you have shared? And you need a mic. Or another final word before we open for Q&A, if you prefer.
I think if we're honest to the values we speak about, our soft power, and if we're honest in living up to our commitment to international humanitarian law, if we're honest to the principles of humanitarian action, if we're honest in sharing power, in localizing and truly supporting local actors as good partners to them, and honest in our mandate of how much it's really our, how do you say, it's our debt also a bit. Sorry, as a German, where would Germany be without humanitarian, without assistance and support? We know so much as a country, and I'm East German, like we know so much. Sorry. We have benefited so much from others supporting us. at our worst, lowest point. So I think if we just live up to the basics of our commitments, both financially and in values and in international law and all the treaties and commitments we signed up for, that would be great.
Thank you. It's overdue to turn to the audience, and let's kick it off maybe with my colleague Darina, research fellow at CHA, who's watching the chat for the past 2 hours. Many thanks for that. And sharing, please, comments, questions, whatever.
Yes, and a big thank you to the online audience. We have 2 comments. One from Stefanie Koopmann. She highlighted earlier on talking about simple answers to complex questions, that beyond just talking about sufficient funds, humanitarians should also discuss more with donors that demand for quick wins and flat impact data often pushes NGOs to create more harm. And even hinders, and this even hinders change. And deep diving on that, she highlighted that we should also question the international standards of what and how deliveries are allowed, because we often overlook old or brand new or better or alternative solutions in that way. And secondly, we have a comment from Rüdiger Schörch from Plan International on prioritization. He strongly disagrees with Mr. Altenkamp, who had highlighted before that humanitarians don't have an understanding of what is enough. We do have this understanding. It's written down in the Global Humanitarian Overview. And it's actually a very modest and recent price tag, and that if Germany chooses not to reconsider their position on funding, that is, of course, a political decision and on prioritization. That's all from the chat right now, and with that, I would turn over to the audience.
Please raise your hand if you have any comments or any questions, and colleagues are coming with flying mics. And yeah, indeed, maybe starting with Ines and then Patrick up here, and then we take a second one.
Okay, thank you very much. I actually have comments or questions to Ramesh, who's still among us, if I correctly see.
Ramesh, do you mind joining us again? I wasn't sure if you could get away. But
humanitarians should stick to their most important priorities and development actors should step in. We have said that and heard that in Istanbul at the World Humanitarian Summit, and very little has happened since then. So there was a little bit of action, but definitely not enough. So we are here 10 years later and the gap has increased. So I'm happy if development actors step in, but we see all the development budgets being cut at the same time, at the same pace. Secondly, we want to work even more with local actors and listen to local communities. And we are supposed to look after due diligence. We NGOs are supposed to look after due diligence. We are left alone with the risk by our donors. We have talked about this for years and years, nothing has changed. So as CEO of Handicap International, sorry, I should have introduced myself. As CEO of Handicap International Germany, known as Humanitarian Inclusion internationally, I have choices to make. Do I take the risk of handing over large sums of funding and to the local actor, yes or no? Thirdly, last point, the very important point about cash. Cash as the solution. We have also heard that for tens of years. Cash can be a very powerful tool, but only if defined by the local communities, only if defined by women from the local communities and other groups included. if we think we can define what cash can do, we can do more harm than we can solve. Thank you.
Many things. Patrick, would you like to follow? And if possible, please stick to one question to allow enough people to speak up.
I'll try to stick to one question. I think I'll really
please introduce yourself.
My name is Patrick Hamadi. I'm a policy advisor at Humedica, a small but global German NGO based in the Alps. I think when I hear the discussion, having listened to all the panelists, what is very clear to me is what some thoughts I had, that there is a real balkanization of the humanitarians. When we had the countries of Yugoslavia breaking up, some thought that is the end of the world. But we have great nations like Croatia, Slovenia, Kosovo is still in the process. It's not a really bad thing. So what is happening is not really a bad thing. There's a sense in which there's a right sizing of a number of issues. But my real concern is this. I think we are still talking as if we are in a humanitarian bubble, forgetting that there are other players. There is other players playing in the international economist. I mean, China is moving on in Africa and other places around the world. So I think the more the humanitarian fraternity will interact with the rest of the others, the more we'll do better thinking outside our bubble. 1. 2, I think this is a time when the walking the talk is going to be very important. How is OCHA, having offloaded 80 million people, going to interact with UNDP, dumping this to UNDP, and UNDP may not have the funding that is that? Here in Germany, how is the Foreign Office, having reduced its budget to 1.0 billion, how is it going to interact with BMZ? Those are some of the things I think where we really need to address this balkanization that I'm really seeing. Thank you.
Many things, a series of major questions, and some of them very, very resonating, I think, all with your work on the development side and Oxfam's work with a dual mandate, etc. Maybe kicking it off with this very tension, I think, has been shared by humanitarian and inclusion. We keep talking about, well, maybe prioritizing humanitarian aid, phasing it out earlier, refocusing on a life-saving mandate, etc., and that then development and other actors need to step in earlier. Is this just a myth? Because we see at the same time funding on all levels decreasing, development actors being very risk-averse, as Ines put it as well. Ramesh, maybe starting with you, is this a fair model and something which could fly, or isn't it also risking that basically all aid actors might step out if we refocus humanitarian?
Thanks very much for the questions. I can't speak for Germany, but if I'm not mistaken, I understand that the development budget has not been cut anywhere near as significantly as the humanitarian budget. So I think
just a bit, yeah.
Yeah, which is actually rare, because I think in many countries it's the opposite. So we're at a stage. Last year we received 40% of what we asked for. So if you have to be realistic here, the money wasn't there last year either. And when we say we targeted almost 200 million people last year, we reached 120 million. I think at best. And even the 120 million that we reached, it was inconsistent. So if you got an aspirin once a year, you were considered part of the reached population. So, I think we're not really good at telling the story of what we do and what we don't do. So I think we need to be a bit more diligent and disciplined about that. But yes, yeah, we're leaving this population also, as Patrick mentioned, of 80 million people who are not being targeted anymore. I don't think they were being properly targeted last year either. I think what we are doing now, in many ways, thanks to the financial crisis, is really being a little bit more disciplined about our work and to be a bit more honest about what we can do and what we can't do. So I think there is that question. We are asking all donors to help share that risk for NGOs carrying the risk of transferring resources to local actors. Yes, we have to fight for that. I think that's going to be imperative. If you don't do that, there's no way. There will be fraud, and if there's fraud, you will find another decrease in funding. So it's a vicious cycle, and we need to address that. On cash, maybe I'll have someone else ask that question. I think we tend to take anecdotes of bad experiences and then label them as the major problem in the situation. I don't think that's, but whenever I speak about cash to people who doubt it, they point to a fact, that, the men get the cash, they go and spend it on gambling and cigarettes and alcohol, and it doesn't come back to the families. Those are anecdotal ones. We've got many, many good examples of where women headed households and women receive the cash, and a lot of good comes out of that as well. But we don't have the full picture, but I think there's a danger that anecdotes can point to an inaccurate picture. And then, Patrick, as I mentioned, I don't think you can say we're dumping it on UNDP because we didn't really assist them properly even last year. But it's not UNDP, it's the World Bank. I mean, the UN development actors are a drop in the bucket when it comes to development. It's the IFIs that really need to do it. So they need to change. I don't know what's going to come out of the World Bank reform process, but we would really strongly hope that that changes. The other thing is that we also need to better engage with actors who are doing bilateral development funding to also start having better advocacy with them in terms of humanitarian principles and going for those furthest left behind to make sure that bilateral action does not focus on, as Tamam was talking about it, the local bourgeoisie. That's going to be a difficult act, I think, with China and India and other actors, but I think we must get into a discussion with them as well. Thanks.
Many thanks, Ramesh. Quickly, maybe addressing the one on, is this a myth that humanitarians should just refocus on life-saving, on the acutest humanitarian needs, and development actors need to step in all these kind of projected crises? What would be your experience, Margaret? If it's a myth that this is a scenario we could build on in future, by refocusing the humanitarian sector on the core humanitarian needs, and then the development actors just need to step in much earlier versus the humanitarians staying for decades in projected crisis.
I actually think there's a good aspect to it, but it needs us to be much more intentional from the beginning on. At the moment, we tend to be in crises forever, and we become permanent structures that as country offices, as UN, we shouldn't. An internationally coordinated system, UN system, should be the exceptional case. And it should, an option would be for it to be time-bound, for us to say from the beginning on, we'll be here for 4 or 5 years, and we'll have a progressive, intentional handover to local actors. And we factor that in from the beginning on. We factor in capacity development from the beginning on, and we are not there to stay forever. This whole system, it's an add-on as an absolute last resort if there's no other way. And we need to be more contextualized in our coordination mechanisms, more localized, more adaptive. That is different in different crises. There's also not one size-fits-all solution. Disasters need much different ways than active conflicts. So there is real potential in thinking temporary solutions through much better, as all of our institutions. As Oxfam, we shouldn't, do we need to have permanent country offices everywhere, or could it be temporary? And the same with the coordination systems, global impact is starting. Yeah.
Thank you. Stefan, one final word maybe on, is it a realistic debate in the humanitarian bubble that we should look much more and much earlier on the development actors, while you described how contested aid is overall?
Maybe a quick reflection on this. I mean, one challenge we really have in the humanitarian sector and development sector is all the change currently happening is based and triggered by the budget cuts. And this is not good. We see it UN80. I mean, this is a reform project initiated by the budget cuts, but this is not good. We need to reflect much more on those fundamental things like mission creep, incentives for fragmentation. Governments are part of it, NGOs are part of it, etc., etc. So this kind of thinking that everything should be driven by the budget situation is probably oversimplistic. It should start with a system we are in need of under conditions we have. So that would be my realistic pitch, that we could dream about something. Yes, we should have a discussion about it, but if we have a budget situation like today, what is feasible with this? Yeah, so in this regard, to have more dialogue between the different bubbles, humanitarian development, it's needed in New York, it's needed in Brussels, it's needed in Berlin, everywhere. Thank you.
Many thanks. I'd like to conclude because we overrun quite substantially already with a quick game, and it's a true or false game. And by nature, if you know it, you have to answer only true or false. Otherwise, you are not allowed to answer. And I'll be strict on this one because people are looking forward for lunch. To give you an example, if I would need to ask myself, the question would be something like, think tanks like CHA and others have been surprised by the latest developments and the crisis of the sector and are not well prepared and need to speed up in providing decent analysis. True or false? I would say CHA, yes, true. Stefan, Eidos, true or false?
True.
Many thanks. Margaret, in times of contested aid, NGOs are to great extent preoccupied with their own survival versus the survival of local partners or the affected people. True or false?
There's no...
Why do I expect that?
Both.
Both. So you take the or. Tamam, sorry for surprising you probably with this question. Media outlets and journalists need to get beyond criticizing the easy UN targets and aid workers and get more pragmatic and provide realistic ways forward. True or false? Okay, you get one phrase because you haven't been in the round before.
True that we should stop, but more pragmatic. I mean, don't we have enough pragmatism in our life? Maybe more principled is the right answer.
Thank you. That was, in a way, quick. And if you wish, you can step in with one phrase, and I'll come back to you in a second. Ramesh, OCHA is in this process a neutral coordinating actor with no self-interest or any organizational issues coming into play. True or false?
True.
So that was the first lie today. Back to you. Margaret, how would you like to elaborate? Shall I repeat? In times of contested aid, INGOs are to a great extent preoccupied with their own survival versus the survival of local partners or affected people.
The humanitarian sector is a people-based. We are people-based. We work for people and we are people. That's all we have and are, and all we are here for. Therefore, yes, there is an incredible human impact through that. I'm still in sentence one. But B, yes, the solution is working more complementary, subsidiary, and supporting of each other. So it's going beyond the survival instinct towards where are we going to and how are we going there best. And that is together.
That was a great final word, I would say. Please give a hand. I apologize. This has been one of the more challenging panels I had to facilitate. And I apologize to stretch you and to keep you busy for more than 2 hours. I apologize to Tamam because I think you only had a chance to come in at some point and always a bit the offline role. But I hope we could give you the space and the key role we agreed before. Many thanks for joining online. Many thanks to the panelists. Many thanks to all of you for your patience, and enjoy the lunch break. And please be back for the second panel in about an hour. Thank you.